What? Huh?
Welcome back to another Creature Commandos breakdown. We are one episode away from the final with episode 6, and we finally got to learn the Dr. Phosphorus backstory while all the Creature Commandos are on the run. Now, this episode had a bunch of references to the DCU and kind of what is already setting up in this universe already. This is what I like about James Gunn's DCU so far, is that all these characters already exist. So we can easily get references to them, we can hear about them, this world isn't new to everyone, and I do really like already seeing that stuff exists here rather than having to wait for it years and years and years and years to get origins. So pretty cool to see what we're setting up. However, what we'll do in this video is we're going to be breaking it down. We're going to talk about Dr. Phosphorus first, then the other Creature Commandos and Rick Flag Sr. Everything was leading into what's going to happen in the final episode, and it's just getting ready for probably one epic fight that's probably going to end in an insane moment. But at least, hey, we are getting a season 2, so that's kind of cool. Who knows how long we're going to have to wait for that. However, because it's TV, I'm sure it'll come out faster than some of the other projects. But as we find out about Dr. Phosphorus and his backstory while this man is on the run, we learn he had a wife and kid. He looked like he had a somewhat happy life as he's trying to cure cancer. He's just trying to get cancer taken out of people's bodies because of his parents and because of his wife's parents, and it seems like this man is really trying to do good. Until he works with the mobsters to get the funding in order to run his project. And then it all takes a turn for the worse, where the details he's giving to the mobsters isn't exactly what they want, so they murder his entire family and pin it on him, making him look like the crazy scientist that lost his mind. But then they drag his ass to the lab, and we find out they're sending his research to Bialia. Now, in the comics, this is a country that's actually had Captain Atom stationed there for a time, and also had its ruler being Queen Bee once she took over, killing the old regime. And now this location has been in the comics for quite a time, because it first appeared in 1987 in Justice League #2. And fun fact about this location as well, the Blue Beetle Scarab was discovered here. So it does have its ties to the DC Comics, having characters come from it and characters go to it. So it's cool to get that little introduction, again, expanding this world, which I already really like how they're doing it. Now, they throw Dr. Phosphorus into that machine, turn it on, which turns him into the monster he is now. And I like how this man went from a simple man. He was very nice. He was helping out his family. He just wanted to cure cancer, and it turned him into this monster, this mob boss. He went out for revenge, taking out all the people in the mob, which I thought kind of makes sense. This man wasn't crazy. He wasn't insane, but by doing all the things to him, you made him crack. You turned him into that monster. But in reality, they have themselves to blame for their outcome. When he's taking out Rupert Thorne and his family, when he first gets to his house, there's a guy reading a lewd magazine. Now, there's actually references to DC characters on this lewd magazine, which I found a very interesting way to introduce that these characters exist somewhere in the DCU. There's only one that's not actually part of the DC comics that was actually shocking, and it made me think of Green Hornet right away, mostly because of the green tie and the green hat they were wearing. And there was another one on the more lewd side that looked like a devil, which could be a reference to Red Devil from the comics. And then on the front page, there was one that looks like Star Sapphire, one of the other Lantern Corps. And we are getting a Green Lantern Corps eventually, so it is interesting to see that there's kind of a reference to Star Sapphire here. Now on the front as well, there's someone who looks like they're having all full of crystals, or maybe ice, which could be a reference to Killer Frost because of her powers turning her all into ice in some iterations. And when he is taking over the mob as well, we see him go to the Iceberg Lounge, which is a notable place that the Penguin owns. Now, after he takes over Rupert Thorne's mob and everything else, we get the first image of Batman, the first not dead Batman so far appearing, with him standing over the skylight, appearing menacing. Just like how we see in the Batman animated series where he's standing up with the dark clouds and everything being that silhouette. Like, it looks really cool, getting us what we're going to be getting. More of a buff, big Batman that's coming, and I can't wait to see how it happens, because we are solely getting teased for all these DC characters. I can't wait to finally get that Batman announcement, because of course they're staying away from showing the suit, so we don't exactly know what we're getting yet, but they're all teasing us for what's to come by giving us that future vision of Batman being dead, but now giving us a flashback with him in it. And I was wondering, when we were watching Dr. Phosphorus run around Gotham, I'm like, we have to see Batman because this is his place. Now, one of the other cool things when it comes to Dr. Phosphorus' backstory that they kind of changed from the comics is that in the comics, Rupert Thorne, who's the person he's working with here, is still someone who causes an accident that makes Alex turn into Dr. Phosphorus. However, it's a little differently where he doesn't actually get thrown in a machine, which in the comics instead, Rupert Thorne is an influential councilman who is putting together this nuclear reactor that ends up having a funding shortfall, and because of that shortfall, when Alex is there, the machine blows up and he ends up getting turned into Dr. Phosphorus. And both Rupert Thorne and Dr. Phosphorus first appeared in Detective Comics number 469. Even though they changed it up a little bit, it's still nice to see that kind of origin stay true to it an extent. Now, Dr. Phosphorus, of course, had little fun moments as well, where he's actually being a kind person. He's eating cereal with this kid, throwing her up in the air. Like, he's kind of remembering what it used to be like a father. So he's not fully evil. Like, most of these characters aren't fully evil. They're kind of troubled in their own ways. So it's interesting to kind of see the more humanity side to some of these characters, because they really showed it as this episode went forward. Now, of course, when we pick up with Bride and Nina, while they're on the run, they end up being together, which kind of makes sense because I don't think Nina would survive very long on her own, and they all both end up in a brothel. Now, this has kind of some fun moments because you have the brothel kind of like, hey, you ladies should work here because men like strange things, which is all to set up that the bride looks like she's doing her all to die rather than stay alive, unlike the girls in the brothel, which is really kind of teasing that the bride needs to have this character arc where she has to stop kind of running away and trying to die, which will all lead into her Frankenstein story next episode. And then we get a couple of drunk guys coming in, they beat up one of the girls, and it turns out they're metahumans with electricity powers. Now, I was fully expecting kind of get a name drop here for someone with electricity powers from the DC Comics, but to be fair, they did not last long because Nina stood her ground and actually kind of had a backbone in this episode where she cut the guy up with a bottle, and then when the other guy tried to come in, Bride just shot him straight in the head and took over and Mortal Kombat that guy by ripping his heart out, which was a pretty brutal scene, and they really like doing those brutal scenes in this episode, but it gives them a badass moment of standing up for the other women and then going on their way to find the castle. And then the Weasel had like a very touching part of the episode where he's going into the wild, he meets wolves, befriends them, they kind of become part of the pack, but then he realizes he has to leave. He has kind of this image of the princess in his head, but he remembers the girl that he saved in his backstory, the little girl that he was so close to saving if it wasn't for the police. Now, this makes me feel like the Weasel does not want to kill the princess, but however, he's gonna do it because he feels like he has to. And it's kind of upsetting because Weasel's not this monster. He was just trying to save the children in his backstory, and now he was just living with these wolves, having a good time, remembering this princess as being someone who's playing fetch with him, and he doesn't want to leave his new friends. So it's just kind of like, I feel like when we get to the part where they have to actually kill the princess, some of them are going to back down because they kind of grown a heart, or they realizing more of their humanity than they once did. Then in this episode too, we see Rick Flag was rushed to the hospital, and Waller is actually by his side, and she's questioning who did this to him, which is kind of proving that my theory about Amanda Waller sending Clayface after him is wrong, because she has no idea who did this to him, which means someone else is working behind the scenes to get Rick Flag out of the picture, take him out, which was also someone taking out McPherson for some reason, and putting Clayface there for whatever reason. Like, there's so many reasons here that we just don't know what's going on, and now it's kind of making me question who's actually behind everything, because we know from the future vision that Gorilla Grodd is the one working with the princess, but there's no way Gorilla Grodd is setting up all these other effects to make it so that these people are taken off the table. So there's definitely some interesting stuff setting up here. And during this as well, we get some references to other creatures in the DCU. When they're asking about what kind of monster dropped off Rick Flag at the hospital, Economos references
reptiloid, amphibious, simian, mite, poltergeist.
Where reptilian creatures could be a reference to Killer Croc, amphibious just Nina, simian could be Kongorilla or Gorilla Grodd, and then poltergeist could be a reference to Enchantress. And I'm only saying this because we've seen these characters in the DC universe before. Killer Croc and Enchantress were in the first Suicide Squad, Kongorilla and Gorilla Grodd were in this, and then of course Nina was in this as well. Kind of teasing, what characters have already been around or what we've seen, and what some of these characters might have already recognized. Then we have Frankenstein in this episode, finding his way to Pokolistan and just murdering the guys on the plains and going home. All heading to find the bride, and I'm interested to seeing how they're going to interact when we see them together once again. Because we've seen them through the flashbacks, it's been kind of runaway, fight, and I feel like something is definitely going to change here, especially with whatever's going to happen with the princess. So it's very interesting to see how they're setting up this final episode. It feels like there needs to be a little bit more for the final episode before we get to it, but we do get that badass Creature Commandos walk as they all meet up to go towards the castle. But the one thing I don't really know is if this is going to be able to end properly in one 20-minute episode. Makes me wonder if the final episode's actually going to be a bit longer, kind of dive more into that story plot. Unless the next episode is just going to start off with fighting, and then we're going to start learning more about that plot during that big fight. Or maybe there might not even be a giant fight. Maybe it'll just kind of go in, they'll realize something's wrong, and they'll put a stop to the fighting, and then we'll have to get more creatures or something else going around the line. But I'm very interested in seeing what happens. I really like this series, and I like how it's a great start to the DCU by introducing characters, setting up the mythos. But at the end of the day, we'll see how the next episode ends, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what it sets up for the DCU, and just, how these creatures leave off, setting up the next season as well, because we will be getting a season 2. I feel like the roster will definitely change, and I'm excited to see who survives, who doesn't. And if we somehow see G.I. Robot again, because I still feel like he left way too soon. Let me know. What did you think of this episode? What other Easter eggs and references did you notice? Let me know down in the comments and we can talk about it. And if you like this video, make sure to hit the like, hit the subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot, and you get to stay up to date with all my Marvel and DC breakdowns. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next week when we watch the final episode of Creature Commandos.